welcome everybody to the Housing Blue Ribbon Committee meeting of October 16th, 2025. Call the roll. Councilor Moreau.
Here.
Assistant Mayor Kelly is at an event tonight. Tracy Kozak is here. Jen Stebbins-Thomas.
Here.
Andrew Simonis.
Here.
Mary Lone.
Here.
Iron Maddow.
Here.
Eric Anderson.
Here.
Dagan Migradich.
Here.
Ronald Leary.
Here.
And, City Councilor John Tabor, and with me from staff are Peter Britz and Peter Stith. We had some minutes to approve. Has everyone had a chance to read those? Okay. Welcome. A motion to approve them?
I'll make the motion.
Okay,
I'd like to speak to them, please.
please.
In the minutes, it talks about the meeting for October, and it says that we were going to have Portsmouth Housing Authority here at that meeting. This is something that I've been asking for since May, and we had a discussion at the last meeting. The assistant mayor, who's not here, talked about the fact that this does involve city staff, so she suggested we have city staff as well as the housing authority. And the only reason that I know that became aware of the fact that they weren't was we got a notice. First of all, we got a notice that the 9th we couldn't meet because of CIP and a couple of other things, but the housing authority was available for the 16th, and I'm just very disappointed that something that I've been asking for since May is being ignored, and I feel that it's an insult to myself as a committee member who asked to have things put on the agenda. And this is not the first time, this is multiple times. And my requests are either delayed or ignored. So, thank you.
As your chair, I would say that we had communication to the committee that we learned that the Housing Authority was putting in its applications for low-income housing tax credits as of 10 days ago. Would not know until mid-November whether those were successful. And as such, we felt it was premature to have any discussion of the Sherburne project till we knew if it was going to happen even this year.
Okay. None of the questions that I had were contingent upon the filing of that application. And if that were the case, I would think that at the very least as a courtesy, someone should have reached out to me to inform me of that, as opposed to the only notification I got is a general announcement. So.
Well, if it's the committee's desire to have PHA here, we can do that. It did go back and look at our mission, which is to recommend, and we worked on this mission a long time, recommend policy changes that would secure permits for at least 500 units of diverse, affordable housing by the private and public sector over the next 2 years, while promoting market conditions to ensure long-term affordability and accessibility for all income levels. So the assistant mayor and I've talked a lot about our work. We have this meeting and 2 more meetings, and we feel our mission really is not to look backwards at what we've already approved and what is now in the hands of the city manager to implement, but to keep working as much as we can on policy recommendations that we can make for the future to solve this housing problem. Any further discussion? Eric?
It's on a different subject, but unless John has something further to say on it was just something that was brought to my attention, I think, with the committee report that was given to the city council. there was some inference in the report by the assistant mayor that the committee had met with developers in discussing what their preferences would be with any development that they were engaged in. I just want to clear that this committee never met with any developers. I think there was council, there were council people that met with the developers, but it was never brought to this committee to have that discussion. But it was inferenced in her report to the whole council that it had taken place, so I just want the clarity on that. If there is clarity, because I think that's the way I read it, and I just wanted that to be clear in what I'm stating.
That it was not the whole committee.
It was not the whole committee.
Councilor Morrow?
Since you weren't at that meeting when she did that report, do you want me to speak to it?
Sure.
I think the idea of actually meeting with them was an idea, and the questions that we asked was actually created this committee, and that was the connection that we discussed. Because this committee came up with, we all talked about how we wanted to meet with some developers and get their feedback on different aspects, and we came up with some questions and areas that we wanted to talk to them about, and that was just part of her report, because this committee had actually initiated the idea, but yes, it was just the three counselors from this committee that met with the developers.
And maybe a discussion with the whole committee would have been exposed more questions or discussions, but, you know, that didn't take place, and that wasn't the way it was reported. But so be it, that's all I want to make a comment on.
Okay, thanks.
Motion and a second for the minutes.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you.
Call the question.
Sure needs to be reminded of that.
Boy, I would have blown right past
Yeah,
that.
no, we wouldn't let you do that, don't worry about it.
Okay, all in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
I wasn't there. Well, I was there, but it was
Remote. She was on the phone.
That's right, that's right. Okay, tonight I thought we could talk to Brian Pope from New Hampshire Housing, in addition to being in charge of the multi-unit housing programs for New Hampshire Housing. He was the housing navigator in Dover, where a lot of innovative things were done. And so I thought we could get as many good ideas out of him as we can. So, welcome, Ryan, and we'll keep this informal, but you and I had talked about things that you're seeing that work, whether those are from Dover, whether those are from other towns around the state. We're coming around the clubhouse turn and in the home stretch, and we're trying to find ways to get 500 units.
Yeah, no, I definitely appreciate that. Thank you all for hosting me this evening. As Councilor Tabor said, my name is Ryan Pope. I am the Senior Director of Multifamily Development and Finance at New Hampshire Housing by day. I am also the Chair of the Board of the Workforce Housing Coalition of the Greater Seacoast. I sit on the board of Fairtide in Kittery, which is a permanent supportive housing agency. And I am also on the leadership team of Home for All. So affordable housing is in my blood. It is very much a passion of mine, both in and out of work. And I know I've worked with several of you already, at least kind of having conversations about how to crack this nut, because it's really hard. So I figured tonight would kind of be, as Councilor Tabor said, an opportunity to kind of have an Ask Me Anything session. I can kind of do a couple quick highlights as to some of the successes and approaches that we had in Dover when I served as the housing navigator in that community. And then also maybe answer any questions folks might have about low-income housing tax credit financing, just the state of affordable housing finance within the state of New Hampshire as of right now as well. So is there a preference as to where I start, or do you want me to kind of run through kind of a debrief of the Dover days?
Works for me.
Yeah,
All right.
I would just add, Ryan, if you could speak to 79E at all, we brought that up in our last
Yeah.
meeting, and trying to understand how to best implement that to achieve our goals.
Absolutely. Yeah, 79E is one of my favorite things that we had utilized in Dover pretty successfully with a couple projects. So I think for the sake of conversation, I can touch on kind of 79Es, ADUs, transfer of development rights, and kind of fold into that how we had approached kind of the sense of affordability in the city of Dover. So I guess starting with 79E, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it is a state statute that allows municipalities to adopt it. And essentially it's an incentive for developers where the municipality, through a series of different provisions that are outlined in the RSA, can choose to work with the developer in public-private partnership to effectively freeze the property tax rate at the pre-development property tax rate for a period of time. The way that we had utilized this in Dover, for those who are familiar with the downtown core, the one that I like to point to most often is the Orpheum project, which is directly behind City Hall. I don't know if you were familiar with it before that, but it used to be a kind of an auto parts parking lot. It's an abandoned theater. And basically, when that was acquired by the developer, they had appealed to the city for 79E provisions. So we had put in place, as the city, basically fixed its tax rate at the unimproved, abandoned building, abandoned auto part lot tax rate for a period of time. And then in exchange for that, we were able to negotiate both public improvements, well, in this particular case, it was public improvements of roadways, infrastructure, sidewalks, and public spaces. This one worked really well. It really revitalized that core function of the town, and provided a nice opportunity for the city to kind of negotiate a public-private partnership with a developer to kind of target a redevelopment of an area that was dilapidated, and offset the expense of that for a period of time. What's nice about that particular project is the 79E term is actually coming to an end. I believe it already happened actually, but don't quote me on that. I don't work there anymore. And when that happens, it will go from an effective tax rate of a property assessed value of $87,000 to tens of millions of dollars, because it is now a large multifamily luxury housing complex. Now, obviously, the luxury housing complex doesn't speak to the affordable housing conversation that we're having here, but it's an example of tying in kind of the conversation, the ongoing back and forth with a developer and with a municipality to get what the community needs out of a form of redevelopment. If we want to talk about an affordable housing component where this was utilized much more recently with Chinburg, was the redevelopment of the old Stratford County Courthouse. So a little further up the road on 1st and 2nd Street in Dover, we had the old Stratford County Courthouse. It was built in the 1800s. It was a lovely courthouse in its day. But when we built the new county complex, God knows when, off on County Farm Road, we no longer needed it. It fell into disrepair and was an abandoned brick building in the middle of town for decades. Chinburg approached the city, and in this particular case, the city was able to negotiate not only public improvements as we had with the Orpheum project, but affordability commitments as well within the building, in compliance with the Housing Opportunity Zone provisions of 79E. So basically what happened is 20% of those units were set at an affordable level to community members earning 80% or less of area median income. The way that we had monitored that at the time, and likely in the future, again, I no longer work there, so I can't speak to how that occurs now, was really looking at the rent ranges published by New Hampshire Housing for 80% income, and then we leave it to the developer to do the income qualification piece in conjunction with the housing authority in that particular instance. Again, that was subject to the provisions of 79E in and of itself, but what was really neat in that project is of 58 units that were created, 20% of those were set at levels that we knew would be affordable to people earning 80% of the area's median income. Those units float within the building for a period of time, and the way that that particular agreement was structured is we granted essentially a 7-year term for the fixed acquisition price of the dilapidated courthouse, and for 21 years, so 3 times the tax benefit, we received a guarantee of the affordability components in there. The affordability components are recorded by deed restriction, so they're recorded prior to the certificate of occupancy, and then monitored by the city in conjunction with the local housing authority. So for that, it was, again, another instance of working with the developer to identify kind of what the needs were, what the barriers to development were, and then working through how to make that happen in a way that benefited not just the developer, but the community at large as well. And if you guys haven't seen the redevelopment of that site, please scope it out. It's beautiful from 2nd Street. On 1st Street, they actually built another building kind of attached to the back of it, but it's a nice mix of commercial and residential space, and it really revitalized what had been a really sad part of town, and a part that kind of had seen some nice recent development come up around it. So that's, I guess, my story on 79E.
Let's
but
pause
if
there
folks have-
for a minute, Ryan.
Yeah.
And, because I think some folks might want to ask questions about that. Eric?
You said, has 79E expired, or is it still applicable? I mean,
No, it's still applicable. Yeah, it's
It's
Fine,
been
you-
expanded recently.
all right, okay, you
Yeah.
need some information.
There's a
It
term
might have
that-
expired.
The
For that project.
tax benefit
Project expired.
does expire. So the tax benefit doesn't last forever. It's for 5, 7, 10 years that the project gets that tax benefit, and then the benefit goes away.
Yeah, and the way that the city of Dover had structured it, at least for the courthouse, because that was the one I was present for, was whatever commitment benefit the city was receiving from the development, we tripled as far as what the community benefit would be. So if they were committing to, well, if we were going to offer 7 years.
I didn't have an internet.
Do we have any examples of 79E in Portsmouth? Or, oh.
It's
No, because
not-
we don't enact, we have
Yeah,
never
the
enacted it.
City council
We
has
actually
to-
just,
Oh, you back, Ryan? Okay.
oh, he's back.
We lost you when
lost
you
you.
said 7 years.
Sorry about that.
Seven.
Another,
Eric?
when Dover measured the applicability of 79E, were there other circumstances in Dover that, I don't know, compensated for that? I know they have, Dover has an impact fee, all right? Did they weigh the fiscal, did they weigh up the fiscal issues on the scale to say, all right, if we exercise 79E, are we gonna, is there a real fiscal compromise with the fact that they have impact fees or something like that? Just a question. I know that's not a situation in Portsmouth, but I think that exists in Dover.
Yeah, so impact fees were in existence for both of these developments. They were reset to 0 at some point last year to help spur new development within the community. But that's a kind of a side issue. For the city, really what the argument was on that front was less of it was more of an investment conversation. So if we think about the Orpheum project, it's tens of millions of dollars worth of new real estate value in the form of luxury condos and commercial and restaurant space in the center of town. That's a much better use of space in the center of town than an abandoned parking lot and theater was going to be. And what the city had found kind of in looking at things is the amount of revenue that we anticipated over time from that particular property in its current form was going to be far less than what the payout would be after its, I don't know the exact term on that one, but what the payout would eventually be when that property was revitalized and utilized as, well, really as it should have been in a downtown core.
Great. If I could ask, just, how did you get RSA 79E approved? Did you have an ordinance that went through multiple readings and passed, or?
Yeah, so I believe that happened before my time there. 79E has been in existence for a long time. Its inception was really about historic revitalization. Was really kind of its core purpose. Was taking really the courthouse model of underutilized historic buildings that you didn't want to tear down. You wanted to incentivize the revitalization of in some way, shape, or form, and that's how it's borne out. As far as adopting it. The city council has the authority to adopt it under the RSA itself, and then from there are different provisions. It's kind of grown from its historical perspective to add new components to it, including one that is specific to housing opportunity for affordability. Now, an interesting component of that is while the city of Dover utilized components of that structure. With the courthouse project, the city of Dover has not adopted the housing opportunity zone provisions of that ordinance, just because the city approaches affordability a little differently than that ordinance strictly identifies. And what I can kind of speak to that a bit, and it kind of bellies back into the general approach that Dover took in my time there and continues to do, is 79E and general affordability provisions. Usually when units are created, they're created at an income level for people earning up to that income level. That's how the LifeTech program works. That's how affordable housing has broadly worked. But it's really difficult to, enforce and monitor from a municipal standpoint, especially by planning staff, when you think about having to income qualify residents, having to review their income documentation, having considerations as to when and if they crest over what that income threshold is, do they then have to be evicted? So the city of Dover took kind of a broader approach and took what is called the HUD fair market rent value, which is a 40th percentile calculation by general market area. And generally speaking, with the exception of honestly, this project, the courthouse project, because the law is written this way, but said HUD fair market is just what the rent's going to be. We don't care how much money people make who live in those units, but we know that those units will always be affordable. And for non-79E projects, and when we get into transfer of development rights and some of the discretionary density bonuses that we had offered there, our approach was to have those deed restrictions in place in perpetuity because they were granted by the city. What's nice about that, it's very easy to monitor. HUD and New Hampshire Housing publishes the HUD fair market table in October of every year. So we know what the rents should be come the beginning of next year. We request the rent rolls and the leases, make sure that they continue to comply. We do spot interviews with the residents to make sure that they're not paying more than that, aside from some utility allowances that we had permitted. And then it's kind of done. We don't have to worry about the income qualification, and we don't have to, well, honestly, a lot of people need affordable housing regardless of their income. What can be tough with an 80% or 60% qualification is you miss the people who fall between 90 and 120%, who still can't afford market rents. So the approach that we had taken in Dover was to just kind of take a broad brush, essentially set the rents at a level that we knew would be affordable in perpetuity, based on kind of any kind of density bonus calculation there, and run with that. That was probably a lot, so I can pause for questions on that.
We've got two bubbling up. Byron?
I'm not familiar with the specific. It sounded like there's an ordinance that was passed, but maybe before your time in Dover that I guess enacts this. My question is, within that, is it applied to specific areas in the city? Is it citywide? What does that look like? Yeah.
79E specifically? It's downtown.
Well, no,
Yeah,
it can
so
be
for
anything.
79E, yeah, 79E does require targeting. So that our 79E zones were predominantly in the downtown core, where we wanted to see revitalization and development post-urban renewal, and the conversion of historical buildings into parking lots. So that was kind of
Lost you again,
You lost your speaker.
speaker.
Now you're on mute.
I'm gonna add that so the city or the town has to pass their own 79E ordinance and identify specific areas.
Yeah.
But then it's not automatic that a project would get the benefit of 79E, so you just say, if you're in this,
You can
You
apply.
can
to the
apply.
city, yeah.
and then I think a project would have to go to city council to get the stamp from city council that they would qualify for the.
The
Yeah,
council.
thumbs up from
That's-
Brian on that one.
That's exactly correct. Can you all hear me again? I'm
Yeah.
sorry,
Yeah.
I lost my speakers for a second. Yes, that's exactly correct. So the municipality adopts the ordinance, identifies the location where it could be applicable, and then each project has to apply and appeal to the city to utilize the benefits of those provisions. So it still remains a discretionary policy. It allows space for the municipality and the developer to kind of have these back and forth conversations to figure out what is in the benefit of the developer, what's in the benefit for the city, how do we make this work together, and where do we find a middle ground to make sure that everyone's getting what they need and want out of this in a way that supports and pulls everyone up.
Yeah, and the language of 79E is all about, we'll give you this deferred tax benefit in exchange for a public benefit, and that public benefit can be a percentage of affordable units, it can be revitalization, it can be both. But that public benefit statement has to be worked out and approved by, the governing body.
Exactly, and oftentimes that public benefit piece is discussed among staff in kind of the preliminary phases before it would even move forward, although that was how we handled it in Dover, and we worked through, we have general ideas of what the community was looking for, did align with the master plan, then we would present that to planning board, to council, prior to project approvals and before moving through that process.
I do wanna, yes, Andrew.
Ryan, you're incredibly smart. I'm really grateful for your time. I think it's really interesting that you have all of these experiences. One question is, were there any other additional incentives that were tagged on to 79E? Or if someone applied to 79E and did not get approved or included for whatever reason, were there other incentives that Dover had to offer, like for using renewable energy or improving their construction materials, things of that nature that helped them if the projects were outside of that downtown zone or out of the established zones?
Not with the provisions of 79E per se. What's interesting in the state of New Hampshire is that all authority for a municipality must flow from the state. And the RSA itself is very prescriptive in how and when these benefits can be applied and what that public benefit has to look like. That said, while we may not have been able to offer kind of the deferred tax rate for that provision, we did try to create some discretionary incentives at the discretion of the planning board that would allow for additional density flexibility outside of the downtown core. I will say in Dover, there was a lot of care taken to use 79E very judiciously. It is an investment, very much like a TIF district. From that sense, like the municipality is foregoing some tax revenue that it would rightfully see, and there has to be a conversation about, is the public benefit truly of enough value to warrant this benefit, and where is that fine line? So if the municipality does adopt those provisions, I would highly recommend working through how and when they would be applied prior to simply just adopting the ordinance and kind of playing it from there. The city has only used it in a couple very distinct instances within the downtown core. But I would say in both of those instances, it was a public-private partnership that provided very clear benefits to the municipality and to the developer in both instances.
A second question, and it may be a good segue, or you can save it for later. One of our recurring themes or hurdles, either way you say it, is some of our projects would not qualify for state resources or state tax incentives. So whether it's in Dover or other experiences that you've had in other municipalities, where can we start to look at increasing incremental density, whether it's 1 unit, 2 units, 3 units, like the little victories, the single base hits that you've seen or worked with?
Yeah, that's a great segue for me to talk about my favorite ordinance
that
in
way.
the world, which is transfer of development rights, which is one that we had adopted in Dover decades ago, and then modified it in 2018 to, I guess, just modified it in a way that made it a little more discretionary, easier to use for planning staff and for developers to understand. So, big picture, broad brush, transfer of development rights is really trying to balance conservation needs of a community with the development needs of a community. At the core, development growth has to happen, but there has to be an acknowledgement that it shouldn't happen everywhere. There are some places where you would prefer to see developed, like a downtown core that's served by infrastructure, in places that you would prefer not to see developed, like the Urban Forestry Center. So the way that we had I guess I'll give a little history lesson on how it normally works in most communities, and then how Dover tweaked it in a pretty unique way. But historically speaking, we had identified areas of development opportunity within the city, and basically authorized developers who owned multiple parcels within the city to contribute land that was of higher conservation value into permanent conservation in exchange for the development right of that donated parcel into a different parcel that we had identified in an area that we would like to have seen developed. That works in its own way, but it can require some land banking. It can require that a developer own parcels all over town, and that's just not it just doesn't work for most projects. In 2018, the city modified that ordinance and basically created a kind of a fee schedule where we authorized developers at the discretion of the planning board, and I cannot stress enough that this was entirely at the discretion of the planning board, to request the right to develop additional units on an existing parcel within certain zoning districts in exchange for, rather than kind of hard conserved land elsewhere, a contribution to the to the Conservation Commission to allow flexibility in how the Conservation Commission solicited, found, and conserved land in the future. So the way that this had been done is an analysis was done of kind of the cost per conserved acre in the city of Dover historically. That cost was essentially added to the fee schedule. So if someone had let's say a lot that could build 2 units by right, and they wanted to build 3 instead, they could petition the planning board and say, I would like to build 3 instead of 2. Rather than go through a zoning process, I'm willing to contribute the value of a conserved acre to the Conservation Commission. Here's a rough up of what that would look like. What do you think about that? The planning board could then say yay or nay as to whether or not they thought that was appropriate for the area, and then that project would move forward in whichever way possible. The way that the city had structured that was the fee scaled down based on what was assumed to be a level of affordability. Basically, if it was a completely unrestricted unit, the cost was just the straight up per acre cost. If it was going to be restricted by size, the sizes that we had in place at the time were 1,400 square feet or 1,000 square feet. That fee scaled down. And then if it was a rental property requesting additional units, and they were willing to deed restrict the additional units at HUD Fair Market, which is that metric I had mentioned earlier, that fee was actually reduced to $0 if it was approved. So a good example of how this was utilized shortly after its modification is the cottage project that was done by John and Maggie Randolph off Back River Road. So for those of you who may or may not be familiar with it, it was a 8-ish acre parcel. By right, we could have done probably a subdivision with, I don't know, 7 to 9 substantial single-family homes. That kind of would have been what the base zoning said. With the applicability of transfer of development rights, these developers came to the city, said, rather than do what I can by right, I would like to do 44 small units instead. Here's how I lay it out, here's how I think it meets the neighborhood criteria, here's the benefit, and I can guarantee that in perpetuity, all of the units will never be leased at more than HUD Fair Market rent. And the city's planning board made the decision at that time to authorize the creation of these 44 units. And they are deed restricted at HUD Fair Market in perpetuity forever, for as long as they stand. And that is again by deed restriction that is recorded prior to the certificate of occupancy for those units. I love that neighborhood personally. It serves a variety of folks. The Randolphs had initially envisioned it as kind of housing for their employees because they were struggling to retain employees who could commute to their assisted living facilities that were located in Durham and Newmarket. In this particular case, it kind of expanded beyond that. It now houses municipal employees from the city of Dover. It has teachers living there. It has people who are served by housing authorities and agencies who work with families who have experienced homelessness. It has seniors living there, and it is such a vibrant community. And it's an affordable community, and it's one that touches my heart every time I drive by.
That's a great story. Did the Randolphs end up paying zero to the conservation fund?
They paid nothing to the conservation fund in this instance because they had deed restricted the entirety of those units to the HUD Fair Market level. Now, I will tell you that this ordinance became very popular after that, was utilized by many developers throughout the city, and at the time of my leaving the city, the Conservation Commission had raised nearly $3 million in additional proceeds to then go and conserve high priority land elsewhere. Which translated to, I don't have the figures in front of me, but it was quite a few acres of conserved land that we were able to get through, even since 2018, and kind of the influx of that income.
Byron?
Just a couple quick clarifying things. So it sounded originally you were talking. It sounded like the developer had to own land that then they could donate that would be conserved. But now it sounds like you can just pay. Okay.
It's like payment in lieu.
Right.
It's like a
Okay.
payment in lieu.
But also if the development like rents in perpetuity are so generous, you also don't have to pay anything, which was the case in this particular. Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. And funds raised from other subdivisions, like in all honesty, the most times it was utilized was it was going to be a market rate, even large luxury home subdivision that by right could build, I don't know, 10 or 15 homes and wanted to do 20 or 25 instead, simply by allowing for reduced lot sizes or kind of the excess density to occur in that area as a function of the transfer of development right ordinance. Any additional unit above and beyond what was permitted by right became fee income into the conservation fund.
Other questions on that?
On that or anything else?
Anything else? Andrew?
You're on the board of Fairtide, is that what you said?
I am.
So we often talk about how living in New Hampshire has a lot of economical benefits, obviously tax-wise, but it also has some limitations, like how certain towns can't enact things until it's done at the state level. In your experience in Maine, what sort of mechanisms or tools or resources do they have that maybe we do not, but we could potentially alter or incorporate in different ways?
That's a kind of a tough question to answer. I will say in Maine, municipalities have much more of an ability to kind of chart their own course, make their own ordinances without requiring explicit permission from the state to do so. That can be a blessing and a curse. I'll say, again, from my experience with Fairtide and with the town of Kittery, that can mean that there are kind of citizen petitions that can change things for the better. Could be more progressive or less progressive depending on where you come from, and then likewise a citizen petition can come forward after the fact to simply reverse it without much due course either. So I'm not sure really where I sit on that fence. Other than I think it behooves municipalities who are trying to think a little more progressively to work with the state legislature to just create a framework where they can make decisions a little more holistically and a little more catered to their jurisdiction.
Great. Other questions?
Ryan, you mentioned you'd give us sort of an update on LIHTC funding and where things stand. It's really
Yes.
rosy out there, is that what you're gonna say?
I don't have nearly as much money as I would like.
Yeah, me too.
I guess kind of big picture, and I had shared a kind of a PowerPoint that I had created in April on this subject with Councilor Tabor. I don't know if it has been shared around, but I can talk.
Was that in the packet?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
But you have it, Ryan? You can share your screen? Or?
Yeah, let me see if I can get that pulled up here. Do I have the share feature? I do. All right, hold on. Can you see?
Not yet.
Yep.
Yeah?
See your screen.
Does it say LIHTC on it?
Yes.
Does now.
All right, nice. All right, so I can kind of scroll through here real quick. I won't go through in great detail, other than to say that New Hampshire Housing, as an agency, we are the state's administrators of the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program. The flagship program of that you guys are all probably most familiar with is called our 9% tax credit. We also do tax-exempt bond financing utilizing the state's bond cap. There's a different kind of tax credit called the 4% tax credit that gets associated with that. And then with other funding resources that we receive from the state and federal government, we have supportive housing and opiate use disorder programs that we also currently administer. So I can kind of plow through here. I'm just going to skip through some slides that I think are relatively boring. Most of this is a history lesson, and I can make sure that you kind of all get it. At the core of it, though, the low-income housing tax credits. We'll go to this picture because I feel like this says the most. So the low-income housing tax credit program is a function of IRS code. So it's not subject to annual appropriations, which is great for us. Basically, the credits are associated or assigned to each state based on population. We are the allocating agency. We do so through a very public process called the Qualified Allocation Plan. There's a point system and all that that allows us to award them to qualified developers based on a point system. So when we do that, we give the tax credits to a developer. A tax credit is essentially it's a dollar for dollar investment. So we allocate, $1 to a project. That project then gets to sell that dollar to an investor, and that's how equity is generated for the project. They obviously have to find the investor. The investor then fronts the money for the project, and the investor gets to recoup that dollar for 10 years. So for each dollar we allocate to a project is worth 10 to the investor itself. And that's kind of the flow of funds on this little chart here. Do we have any questions on here before I go into the the calculation of how those credits work and what that equity actually looks like in a potential project.
You might flip back to the previous, which is the difference between the 9% and the 2%.
Yeah, absolutely.
4%, sorry.
Yeah, so the 9% is really the cheap competitive round that we offer. And the 9% LIHTC, the easiest way to kind of describe it is that it's designed to provide a 70% LIHTC equity subsidy to projects that qualify for it. It can be used for rehabilitation, for new construction, and they are a very limited resource. So they're highly competitive. We get typically a dozen or so applications every year, and we can only award 4 or 5 in each year. So Sherburne applied this year. We haven't run through our entire scoring process, so I can't tell you how that will pan out. Interestingly enough, they've also applied for a 4% LIHTC, which is unlimited. The only caveat with that is that they are contingent on tax-exempt bond financing, which is subject to the state's bond cap, which is a limited resource as well. That's also assigned by the federal government. And we can only issue tax-exempt bonds up to whatever our bond cap threshold is. We share that bond cap with the Business Finance Authority. So half of it goes to kind of business and economic development. The other half goes to housing development, which includes our homeownership programs, which are largely financed on this program as well. When we do tax-exempt bond financing through this, basically 4% of the amount financed through bond can be eligible for tax credit as well. And it has the same kind of flow of funds as you saw on the other slide, as far as finding the investor, getting the money into the program and all that. Typically speaking, on a bond finance project, the bond itself is used for about half of the financing, and then the equity that comes into that accounts for about 30% of the financing. So in each of these cases, there has to be additional resources brought to projects in order to bring them to fruition. Not all of it can be financed by New Hampshire Housing or through LIHTC Equity or through bonds in general. Does that make sense? Was that helpful?
And who sells those tax credits?
The developer is responsible for selling the tax credits in each case. So oftentimes when a developer would apply to us for financing at New Hampshire Housing, they will be working either with a direct purchase investor. Normally it's a bank, typically a very large bank that has a community reinvestment requirement. Again, a federal government requirement of financial institutions. Having been a banker and having done CRA work, can tell you it's a beast to manage. But the tax credit program provides a nice opportunity for banks to show a reinvestment in the community while defraying their income taxes, their federal income taxes down the road. So oftentimes a developer will come either with a singular investor, which is traditionally a bank, kind of in tow, or they'll work with what's called a syndicator, which is essentially an investment agency that pulls together multiple potential investors into one big pool that then buys the tax credits for an individual project. So I don't have their application in front of me. I can't tell you how Sherburne's is structured. But in most cases, we see a syndicator scenario where someone will come with an agency like Evernorth or RBC Capital, who has multiple, typically smaller banks who can't afford to buy the entirety of a project's equity, that are kind of fronting the money for the construction of these projects and then recouping that benefit over 10 years.
Right. Keep moving.
All right. So at least for the 9% program, I'll at least show you how it's calculated because I find it fascinating. You may find it boring. I always say this is like the most boring PowerPoint in the world, so feel free to stop me when you want. This is as of this year. This is actually subject to change next year. Part of the recent funding bill before the government shutdown was an expansion to the LIHTC program. So theoretically, come next year, we will see our state allocation of 9% low-income housing tax credits increase by 12%. So I haven't run that figure yet. But it's all based on population. So based on an assumed population of 1.4 million, the way it was calculated is, $3 per person, gives us as a state 4.2 and change million in tax credits to be allocated. The way that generally pans out is we take that, and then investors typically don't spend a whole dollar on their tax credit benefit that they will receive over time. It usually falls in the mid to high 80 cents range. So what you'll see here is of that credit allocation that we receive every year, we assume an estimated cost of 88 cents on the dollar based on the investor market. That gets multiplied out over 10 years. So the actual tax savings that gets passed on to the investors and then converted into equity for the projects comes out to about $37 million that we allocate annually in tax credit equity for projects that we award in that particular year. So yeah, basically the LIHTC equity functions as upfront capital subsidy. It does not help with operations at all. It only helps with the construction. The 9% credits are highly competitive, as I'm sure Craig would tell you if he were here. And they're awarded and based on the scoring criteria that we publish biannually through our qualified allocation plan. Now, just as a plug for a qualified allocation plan, if you guys want to take a peek at it, it is published on our website. It is enacted essentially by the governor of the state. And if anyone has any thoughts or recommendations as to how it can be modified, what we should be looking at as far as what we incentivize from a points category and how we allocate these credits, we are open to comments at all times. We're actually in the midst of rewriting it for next year, so you've got a couple months to provide comments if you would like to. A little bit about the QAP, owned by the governor.
Public service announcement.
As far as the 4% program, I feel like I've already discussed that as far as it being contingent on bond financing, utilizing the tax exempt bond cap. The tax credits function exactly the same, except fewer are awarded for these projects, and they tend to be a little bit more, they tend to be a little larger. It's hard to make a 4% project work really at anything under 40-ish units or so. And I will tell you, for the 9% program, the sweet spot is really between like 35 to 40 so units on that front. Now that said, folks can apply for both at the same time, utilize kind of both equity programs and leverage, essentially leverage more subsidy resources with multiple investors to do more. And build larger projects, which I know for a fact is how Sherburne is being presented now, is kind of a combination of both. And we refer to that as a twin financing project. As far as the other programs that we offer, supportive housing, speaking with my Fairtide hat on, this is what we have utilized in Maine for our development projects. Typically smaller scale, typically for a more targeted population. So if you think about individuals with intellectual developmental disabilities, people who have experienced homelessness, people in recovery, this tends to be the sweet spot for that. The dollar amounts are much lower. There's no tax credit provisions to it. Tends to be a little more flexible, and we work a lot closer, honestly, with the developers and service providers to make sure that these projects can get up and off the ground. And then new this calendar year, although we'll have our second application round next year, is the opiate use disorder program. This is essentially pass-through money from the Sackler lawsuits that the state received, allocated funds to us at New Hampshire Housing to build recovery-specific housing for individuals and families that have been impacted by opiate use disorder. So that we just launched this year. We were able to fund 4 projects through that. we have another round that we will launch next year, and we're waiting to see how that one goes. Now, I will tell you from kind of a state standpoint, I want to add a caveat to the supportive housing program at New Hampshire Housing. We have historically funded that with our allocation of state affordable housing fund dollars. That's kind of an off-the-top allocation of the real estate transfer tax. In this last budget cycle, we are receiving our statutory minimum, which is $5 million a year, which we utilize the Affordable Housing Fund for a variety of uses, including kind of soft money financing in the LIHTC projects, as well as funding our supportive housing program. So our subsidy dollars are extremely limited to the point that we will not be having a supportive housing round this year, and the amount of capital subsidy that we are able to allocate to LIHTC projects is also severely restricted for the next 2 years as well. I can pause there, and then I can share with you how soft money financing works in a LIHTC deal if folks are curious about that.
How you guys doing?
Can I just add a little bit? So Ryan, I just want to add, from the perspective of a business owner, I was actually approached to purchase tax credits. I don't know if anybody else in the room has had this experience, but when you have a lot of extra money, I had a lot of extra money one year, and I bought $10,000 of credits as a business owner. They call you he keeps talking like investor, and I think that terminology is a little inaccurate, because you might just be a buyer of credits. So you have no control. Like sometimes investors have controls over projects. So I want people to understand that you don't actually have any control of the project. You buy those tax credits and you get to use them to pay your future taxes over a period of time. That's what it boils down to. Money you're going to spend on taxes anyways. So I just wanted to add in that little caveat, because I think it sounds like you're actually being invested in a project when really you're just buying tax credits. So I make that clear.
That's exactly correct. Thank you, Beth.
Eric?
What's the projected reduction in LIHTC dollars for this year? Do you have any indication? What you mentioned that, I was just curious to know.
Yeah, so our LIHTC funds, our ability to allocate the tax credits is actually set to increase this year at the federal level, which is great news for us. The issue that we're facing, and I can expound on that in just a moment, is on the state allocated subsidy resources. So I can tell you for the last biennium, we received $35 million in state allocated resources through the Affordable Housing Fund. And in this upcoming biennium, we are receiving 10. So it's a substantial decrease for us. And the way that the state allocated subsidy works is it's a revolving loan fund that we utilize as essentially 0% loans. And when you're looking at the financing of these projects, you have, obviously, LIHTC equity is a big component. Any of the debt that comes in is a big component. And because there are federal resources and because they're very targeted populations, the federal government and general policies have really, all of these deals are they're underwritten kind of on the edge of a knife is the easiest way to describe it. And any additional funds that are required, if they come in as hard debt, like amortizing with interest, that doesn't work quite well in the pro formas of these. So the subsidy resources that we allocate through the state, they are loans, they are repaid, but the way that they're repaid is not out of operating, not out of the budget per se, but out of their surplus cash flow. So basically, the project functions. If anyone here has owned a business or acquired a bank loan of any kind, you kind of have your debt, and then you have your income at the end of the year. And the way that the Affordable Housing Fund and other subsidy resources that are administered by New Hampshire Housing are recouped is at the end of the year, you get your profit. We take half of that to repay this loan. We don't know how much of that we're going to get every year. It's going to be dependent on what happens. But that flexibility is really important to fill and plug those gaps that appear in specifically the LIHTC projects that we're seeing. So that reduction in state allocated resources for the next couple of years really restricts our ability to insert $1 million here, $1 million there to kind of shore up the financing gaps that we anticipate seeing in our 9% and 4% applications going forward.
Thank you.
Okay.
And then, yeah, beyond that, I guess aside from the Affordable Housing Fund, which is state directed, we do receive federal allocations of home dollars and housing trust fund dollars. These are very specific to deep income targeting. So think 50% of area income and below. These resources can be used for that. I will note, we receive what's called the small state minimum for these resources. So it's about $3 million a piece for home and housing trust fund. They are very difficult to use without project-based vouchers because people making 20, 30, 40, 50% of area median income obviously can't afford to pay anywhere close to market rent. So project-based vouchers help kind of fill that gap for those folks. And the other thing, just to keep in mind with any federally directed resources, is they are subject to many additional federal regulations. I'll just point out, Build America, Buy America is one that we are all watching closely. That was a provision that was passed in the last administration that appears to be upheld in this administration, where there's a preference where any federally directed dollars used in any construction project, the components of said project have to be built or produced in America. And for things like elevators, heat pumps, we just don't have the production capacity in America to account for that. And with the recent cuts to HUD and to the agencies that process the waivers and review those supply chains, we're not entirely sure what that will look like when we have projects where this kicks in. We've got 2 lined up this year, and it's really just kind of a waiting game to see how this plays out from a Build America, Buy America standpoint. So the golden dollars for us are the state distributed affordable housing fund. There's a lot of flexibility there. If anyone knows anyone in Concord, please make a plug for us to increase our allocations, not next year, but for the next biennium. And that's really the bulk of the information from this front. But I guess I can exit out of here and free it up to folks if you have any questions about that or any other thoughts you kind of want to pose to me on behalf of New Hampshire Housing or just housing in general with regard to the financing and or regulatory environment.
Do we have any sense for after the 12% increase in the coming year, what the longer term looks like for LIHTC?
Yeah, so the 12% increase is set to be permanent, which is good. The kicker to that is I don't anticipate that we'll be funding more projects with that. Costs have increased at such a clip that I would anticipate that the 4 or 5 projects that we've been able to fund in the past with essentially $880,000 allocations, will require larger allocations of tax credits in order to remain financially feasible. So I would expect that while we will receive the ability to allocate more tax credits, that will just mean that more tax credits get assigned to each project to ensure that they can proceed. So I'm not anticipating much by way of us being able to build more per se, just kind of meet the realities of our current construction market.
Great. John?
Ryan, you mentioned, I believe, about when you were talking about Dover, that your focus was making the affordable and not on checking the income level. So, is there when you think about people being eligible to get something, you think about income levels, etc. Is there? So what I'm hearing you say is that there's no oversight with regards to who gets these affordable units. They're just there, they're affordable, That was the focus. And if someone goes into one and frankly has a significant increase in income, say only one spouse was working and the other one gets a job, that doesn't impact their eligibility. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yes for Dover, no for the New Hampshire Housing Finance Project. So I've got a couple hats that I'll just flip around here. For anything that I just talked about that is financed by New Hampshire Housing, we do monitor those properties because they're federal programs. There are very strict criteria as to income thresholds. When I was at the city, the approach that the city took, none of the ordinances that we passed were at odds with this or these kinds of financing programs. But if they didn't incorporate these kinds of financing programs and weren't subject to additional regulation, we felt as a municipality that it was really not our place to income verify and make those determinations as to who the winners and losers are as far as the provision of affordable housing. And that was for a few reasons. Like namely, the affordability need ranges outside of kind of pre-prescribed income levels. And a lot of the issues that we were identifying in conversations with our residents was that you had a lot of overhoused folks. I'll use myself as an example. My wife and I live in a 3-bedroom house and we sleep in one of the bedrooms. Unless the dog has an accident in our bedroom, and then we switch to another one. But that's 3 bedrooms that's being utilized by 2 people. And in that particular instance, like, do we need that much house? What's tying us to that house? If we were aging or if we needed single-story living, are we trapped in this house? And just because we might have income or assets that would push us over these affordability thresholds doesn't mean that we wouldn't be looking for something that might be smaller and more affordable for us to move into. So it was kind of taking a holistic approach of what are the needs, what are the concerns, are people trapped in their current environment, do they feel trapped in their current environment, would they move if they had a more affordable option to move to, and kind of breaking it down from the whole concept of, like, should we really get so caught up in, like, making sure that the folks who theoretically need it are getting it, or just making sure that we're providing a broad community benefit and knowing that we have those in place forever, and then selfishly from the municipal standpoint, not having to monitor it, was the approach that we took. And I will tell you from a policy standpoint, that approach isn't super popular at the State House, but it's one that I am willing to stand by because I feel that it works. Unless you're financing with LIHTC, and then it doesn't work.
One other quick question. One of the areas that's been talked about a lot is providing affordable housing for artists. Do you have a general comment with regards to that? Is that something that has some issues relative to selecting something for a particular group versus?
I don't have a particular comment on that per se. I think provided there's affordable housing created that can accommodate the needs of really anyone in the community who needs it and or wants it, that market would theoretically kind of hopefully provide for that.
Okay.
I think at the end of the day, the big conversation is affordability is really, it's a function of density. And if you're not flexible enough to kind of build the additional units and get creative with how you accommodate levels of affordability, then you're just not going to see it.
Thank you.
Eric, and then we should wrap up because
Just quick, since the application process is closed, how many LIHTC projects are you do you think you're gonna have to oversee or score, and how many will be projected to be funded?
Yeah, at this point we've received nine final applications in the application round. I anticipate that we will fund 4 or 5 of them, as we have in years past. I can't speak exactly to that. I try to keep myself removed from the initial scoring process just because I participate in conversations like this, and don't want the appearance of things being skewed
Understood.
on that front.
That's great. Well, our heartfelt thanks to you. I know you had the flu earlier this week, and that's why we decided to do Zoom. I hope you're feeling better, and so double extra thanks for getting up off the sick bed and being with us tonight. It was very, very interesting, some great concepts. We'll hopefully turn into some recommendations down the road.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Yeah, absolutely.
thank you very much.
Thank you, Ryan.
All right, we'll see you later.
Couple more items on the agenda and then public comment. But maybe just take a minute to just reflect on some of what we heard. Brian?
Yeah, I mean, I think we just got a free lecture. That was an incredible amount of information and really fantastic. It seemed like, I mean, it seems like, I don't know what the best process would be, but it seems like the two opportunities with 79E and the transfer of development rights and what would need to happen, within the city to get those things configured in such a way that they would be beneficial, seem like really clear pathways. And then I thought just on his commentary on not holding monitoring the income of the individual seems like there's a ton of wisdom in that. And so I think hopefully that would be something that if we went down that path, would also continue. And then also his last comment of affordability as a function of density, I think is a really good way to articulate what we've been sort of after. So that was some of the thoughts I had on that. Yeah.
Great. Okay.
Beth was gonna say something about 79E, and when she returns, I'd love to hear. She started like, "Well, we've drafted something like that." I don't know if you knew what she was gonna talk about.
That was part of the recommendations.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's like I don't know if it's this committee or if there's a specific working group that would like
Shepherd that.
that, but that seems like a high priority from my perspective. Yeah.
It's been referred to the legal department.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and legal said, we'd like more clarity on what you want as a council. Do you
In
want,
ping pong, send it back our way.
When we were talking about 79E, you were about to say something like, "We've drafted," or "You're looking at it in a different committee."
I believe we sent it to planning board or the master planning process.
send it to the master
Planning process, there we go.
Well, we also said a work session.
That's right. We also talked about having a work session in December, I think,
Yeah, and that was in
so that
the,
we could talk
This
about
group would have a work session, or
city council. City
I see.
council would have a work session mostly because they wanted to actually, there's several different aspects that you can adopt as part of it.
Right.
And, there's some people want to pick areas for the coastal resiliency. We want to talk about housing opportunity zones. And I guess staff just really wants more direction as to what to focus on and what our criteria kind of is, so. Sorry, I had to go to the bathroom.
The fee be part of the pay in lieu and go into the housing trust fund if we were to request it? Or would it
I
have to be
don't
specific?
know. We'd have to ask the legal department that. Does it have to go to Conservation Commission? Could it go into Housing Trust? Since it is a Housing Trust for affordability, I would think it could go in either, but I don't know that off the top of my head.
That's a good question with the TDR as well.
Right. Well, I think that's where he was headed toward, was the TDR, which
Yeah.
I really do think we should explore TDRs and how those could.
That's actually what I was talking about. I just got
figured.
my,
I assumed.
I mean, they've raised $3 million for conservation. $3 million in Portsmouth would maybe buy one of those tiny islands in the back channel with our land prices.
It could be better spent.
Right, what Dagan's saying is that maybe it's not for conservation, maybe it's for
Housing
the
trust.
Housing trust fund.
Yeah. Right. And that would be a good
Build
way
more
to explore.
housing, but pay for it so that we can build more housing.
Or we can at least support the
Virtuous
development
circle.
of more affordable housing.
Yeah.
That's an interesting twist.
I'd be really curious how we can workshop different zones for 79E. think it goes without saying that our central downtown is probably not considerable in terms of economics of a deal, or just even availability for density to yield enough that it's attractive. So if we're looking outside of downtown, obviously we're looking at gateway districts, we're looking at maybe even potentially single family zoning and how that may apply. You know, I've talked a lot about like the conversion of Victorian buildings, Islington Street, Madison Street, Merrimack.
Yeah,
So if we're considering that, which sounds like we're making good progress, how can we word it to include some of these neighborhoods that are low-hanging fruit and historically have been converted and lie in mixed density zones already, but maybe unofficially or grandfathered in a different way?
Right.
So that to me is very intriguing because that's where I think the bulk of this benefit can come from.
And if we're also trying to improve the hand of getting these zoning amendments passed, and you know, one of them is the 1980 restriction. If we're saying, well, we can use 79E and apply that to certain zones where some of these houses are clustered that are now opened up for the ability to turn into multifamilies, it just kind of creates its own sense of momentum. I also think the optics of not focusing on downtown.
I was going to say that too.
Like,
I'm glad you said.
yeah, like, I mean, people, there's going to be a lot more public goodwill if we're, you know, not messing with the fine china, but we're focusing some of these areas that we're.
Had we adopted it 10 years ago, the West End would have been a perfect place to enact it, because when those brewery buildings were sitting empty, it could have been a great opportunity, and we just, it
Value's
didn't
so
happen.
high now that just like.
And instead,
Yeah.
and instead we just got beer.
Well, I'm sensitive to our 10 of 7 wrap-up tonight because of planning board. Update on the 1% loan fund. I actually, Jen and I have been talking to financial institutions. We went up to Lighthouse Credit. It turns out they are working on a collaborative effort to create a housing fund. And it's not necessarily, it's Seacoast wide, but they're meeting monthly. And I think, Jen, your brother may be involved in that.
Not in the fund, no.
Yep.
But we're working with Lighthouse, we just built their headquarters. Yeah.
So, the next meeting is Monday. I'm going to attend that. If there's anyone on the committee who would like to be if there's a working group that's getting going, if there's anyone on the committee who'd like to be our representative to that, I'd love it. Okay,
Think on it.
I'll leave that hanging out.
I can't fit anything else in my schedule.
I know. So that's that update. And then, as you all know, we referred 4 policy items to the council, and some are coming back to planning board tonight. I just thought,
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
we'll see what happens.
We'll see what happens.
Do we know which ones?
I think all but 79E.
Right, all but 7.
All but 79E.
Okay.
Yeah.
Some HTC, solar panels.
Oh, solar panels was one of them, where it was the
The
1980 conversion density,
site, parking in the site plan,
parking into site plan, and
gateway
the
parcels.
and the gate and expanding industrial into gateway.
Yeah.
When you say
There's
coming
two
back to
zones.
planning board, can you clarify
It's
what you
actually
mean?
being heard at planning board, but planning board will be discussing it tonight. Because city council refers it to planning board then discusses it. Some of those, they're supposed to give, I'm supposed to give a verbal feedback on Monday, so I can tell you more after tonight.
Why is 79E not coming back?
No, because we want to do that work session. So 79E, because of the work session, we asked staff to look at it, and that was their reply to us is, because that doesn't need to go to planning board until we actually we asked staff to write an ordinance, and they're like, well, what do you want? And that's where the work session came from, so. It's taking a slightly different route.
you see who on the council gets all this stuff done.
Seriously. And you don't have any more time left in your schedule, Beth?
I'm really busy at work, guys. Really, really am.
Okay, and last is public comment. Jerry,
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone.
come on up if you'd like. I think We want to make sure you get into the microphone.
Because we have a ceiling microphone now.
One of the things I've learned.
Address and, name and address?
Jerry Duffy, 428 Pleasant Street. One of the things I've learned in being a housing advocate is what has to go into zoning reform. There's so much work has to go into that. And then it sits there in paper, in the ordinance. And so what I've been thinking about is that there's, when we have the things like the co-living, expanded ADU possibilities, the 1980 rule changing, all those are creating opportunities, right? But do we know that the people who could use those opportunities know about those changes? And my guess is probably no. There's probably a lot of people in Portsmouth who probably don't know that their property would be a good candidate for an ADU, for instance. So I was playing around with the idea of a Portsmouth Housing Opportunity Toolkit. I don't think it would be a heavy lift for the city. We're already doing it to some extent on the Progress Portsmouth Housing page. We've got one-page quick starters for ADUs and for co-living. And so I would be happy to put a presentation together or a packet together and submit it to this committee that would suggest ways to do that. And it would be about, it's not marketing, we had talked about this a little bit, but it wouldn't be the city marketing, but it would be outreach and trying to just make sure those opportunities are taken. Because if they're just sitting in the ordinance and people don't know about them, large developers and their attorneys probably know what's going on. The smaller builders, the potential beneficiaries probably don't. So you'll have to tell me whether you want me to go ahead and do that, but I'd be happy to do it.
That's a very generous offer from a good communicator. We got anything like that?
It's 10 up. Just thought I'd point that out.
Just some things that Howard put together on the website. We have the ADU handbook.
Of course, the ADU law's changing now.
The ADU law changed, so the handbook's wrong.
That's coming first tonight too.
Will be updated.
This is an example. The ADU, I think, is about 30 pages or something like that. Might be longer. So we condensed it into a one-page checklist, so someone could look through that, take 30 seconds, and decide whether it's for them.
Right.
That kind of thing.
Be happy to. Yeah, sounds good. Any other public comment?
Move to adjourn?
Second?
Oh, so I'll second.
All in favor?
Got more
Thanks,
meetings.
everybody.